Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. And today I'd like to talk about two very special memoirs that I've read recently. If you watched my most recent wrap up, which I'll link down below, I touched on both of these books there, but I wasn't able to really delve deeper into them, and I wanted to kind of do that. I wanted to do that and also do a bit of a comparison because I think these two books are both excellent and I would highly recommend. But you might also be wondering, which one might be better for you to start off with. So the two books are Heavy by Kiese, Laymon and All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So a few themes that both of these memoirs have in common are one, blackness as a theme. Both of these men are black, and in their memoirs, they are giving us a window into what that meant for them growing up, and in the case of Laymon, into adulthood. So yes, there are instances in which each of these individuals come into contact with the police. They talk about having the talk, their parents having the talk with them. In the case of George M. Johnson, his father was a police officer, and he doesn't delve deep into what that means, but he does tell us that was a journey he had to go on in terms of like understanding his dad as a part of a system of oppression, right? That just because his father was a police officer did not mean that the police shootings that became such an important part of his life were okay, and that he was going to shy away from activism in those areas. For Kiese Laymon, that fear of violence, I feel like he delves into much more, and he's very honest about how his experiences with institutions like the police and others played an important part in shaping who he is, and also his activism. His career as well. So another the big themes that both books delve into is masculinity, and how kind of masculine and black friendships are formed for each of these men, and how it helps shape them into the adults that they are today. Some of those are really interesting. As someone who is not male, how young boys relate to one another in different ways, and again, I was just so impressed by how open both authors were about talking about embarrassing situations, the situations that most people would not want to talk about sexual abuse, sexual experimentation, and how those moments were key in their lives. That doesn't mean that women don't play a role in both memoirs. In fact, women play a very prominent role in both. In Heavy, it is because Kiese Laymon is writing this as a kind of letter to his mother, and in a lot of ways kind of showing her what she did wrong without being angry. I never felt like he was angry saying, look at all the terrible things you did, mother. No, it's kind of more like, hey, this is how things occurred from my point of view, and how you have played a really important role in shaping me, Mom. And that was really powerful the way he did that. For Johnson, it was his grandmother. I mean, his mom plays a role in the story as well. He has kind of essays that are clearly focus on different members of the family, but throughout the entire memoir, it is his grandmother who is kind of the most important figure there, because the grandmother kind of became the focal point of the family, the glue of the family, and she took on a lot of the care of the grandchildren, and so as a result, it just played a really important part in their lives. Another important theme in both books is that of class. Both these men kind of experience some degree of poverty at some point, but also are kind of in this in between, working class and middle class, right? Or at least I felt like there's a gray space in between there, and I don't know how each of them would classify, the economic class that they belong to as kids. They both talk about though poverty and like how hard it was to um, pay bills, get things that they needed, things like that. But also for Johnson, for example, like he comes from a family where like they had a roof over their head. His dad is a professional, so was his mother. For Laymon, his mother was a professor, an educated professor. But, he's very clear about how she has this kind of status as a professor. That did not mean economic stability. And as someone who is a professor as well, I understand. I very much understood that aspect of it, of how, there's a degree of respectability that career can bring, but that for communities of color, that does not mean economic stability, especially within the Black community, where inherited wealth just is not common in the same way that it is in white communities. Now, some key differences between the two books, and this is where, if you are thinking about which one you would start with or only reading one, this is where you need to pay attention. So, time. The time covered in each book is different. Heavy takes place over a longer period of time in his life, and that gives us kind of a broader perspective of the things that have shaped him over time. We're also able to see him delve into his career choices, and he's able to kind of bring us on the journey of how race has played an important part of, again, the different institutions. So at one point, Laymon is a professor as well, and he's in college, and then he's in graduate school, and then as a professor, how like he's allowed into these spaces, but it's clear that these spaces were not made for him as a Black man. And I very much related to his critique of academia as someone who has a PhD, who spent 4 years in college and then 9 in graduate school. Like everything he says rang true to what I saw in academia and what my experience was as well. So I really very much connected to that section of the memoir in particular. In All Boys Aren't Blue, Johnson sticks to adolescence, right? We get a window into his adolescence, but he is also a queer man, and so he gives us this experience not just as a Black man, but as a queer Black man. And so, what his sexuality meant to him, how he discovered it, and what it meant in his family. His family is really interesting in this aspect. Like, you're not going to get clear-cut images of his family. Like, his family was not against his queerness, but they were queerness was not something that was completely accepted right away in his family. And so you get this kind of difficult place where he is, where his family clearly loves him, but his queerness does set him apart to some extent. And that was really interesting to read about in his experience. So both books, though, are very raw and very powerful, right? You're going to get to see racism, homophobia, sexual assault, sexual experimentation. So those are all content warnings that I would warn anybody before going into them. But I think that for anybody who has been reading the racism books, right? Whether it's How to Be an Anti-Racist, or it's White Rage, or White Fragility, or any of those books. I think I've been reading some of them, and some I had already read. But I think those books can do a really good job of introducing you to a lot of these topics. And the next level, that is to delve deeper into experiences that are not your own. Or at least that's my take, my recommendation on how to approach what is a continuous journey of learning. right? Anti-racism is something that you practice every day, and one of the ways you can do that is through reading. And so when you're ready to go beyond some of these books, I highly suggest Heavy and All Boys Aren't Blue, because they offer you windows into experiences that might not be your own. And they do it so wonderfully and in a way that doesn't pull back, and also fixes the problem that I've seen a lot of people that are trying to be white allies or white accomplices, or Latinx allies and accomplices deal with, and that is, if I can't expect Black people to answer all my questions, then how am I supposed to learn, right? Because, Black people don't owe us any kind of education. They don't. And for those of us who are not Black, our job is to still find that information. It's to do the work. And one of the ways in which we can do that is through reading. And these two authors have opened up windows into their experience that I find really important. Both writers are also very active, like places like social media. And so looking up the resources that they share, I think, can be very helpful, without burdening them with, like, it is your job to inform me, or without having to ask them personal questions. Like, really, like, everything that they want to share with us, they've put in this book about their lives. So again, I don't think it's fair to, like, want to ask them more on these topics unless, they're doing some sort of event in which they've said that is okay. But I think that they're already giving us a lot in these books, and I highly encourage everyone to pick both of these up, or at least one that you think you would like more. I think Old Boys Aren't Blue specifically is written for a younger audience, though people of all ages can appreciate it, but it might be a good book to even gift to a teenager and adolescent that might be looking for a book to relate to. I think that All Boys Aren't Blue is very relatable, and Heavy is a heavy book, but it just does so much, right? Like, one topic I didn't even get into here is the way that body image plays a role in the stories, not just in terms of skin color, but also weight and physical appearance. Heavy is very explicit on that, because Kiese Laymon tells us that he was a overweight kid from the very beginning, and he has a very complicated relationship with weight and self-image throughout his life. For Johnson, there's not so much of that, but there are other aspects of where he delves into, his self-image as a queer man that I think are just as interesting and complex. But there's a lot here. So highly encourage everybody to pick these books up. If you have more to add, please go ahead and post, add a post down below in the comments, because there's so much I'm not touching on in the interest of time, and these are all discussions that we should be having. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.